Hello, my name is Paul Stevers, and I'm chair of this conference. And I hope you have had a chance to look at some of the other sessions in this conference. And after listening to the security experts about the impacts of climate change on human security, I expect many of you will agree that climate action is needed on a very large scale around the world. In this session, we will highlight climate solutions that can be implemented at this scale. We're very pleased to have a diverse group of experts today who can introduce these solutions to you. Our first speaker is going to talk about what can be done to further scale up solar energy around the world. His name is Gianni Chianetta, and he's CEO of Global Solar Council and president of the Worldwide Carbon Price, serving as founding member since 2015, representing Italia Solar as vice president and head of international affairs and co-chair of the organization. Mr. Chianetta was elected to the board in 2019. So, and he's a chairman of the Global Solar Council, member of the steering committee at Irina Coalition. He's also founder and director of Greening the Islands and CEO of the Green Consulting Group since 2013. Thank you, Gianna. I'm looking forward to your talk.
Thank you for this kind introduction. Thank you for the invitation for such an event. I think this kind of event are very much needed in this moment of brainstorming and anyway cooperation to build a new future. I'd like to share really simply a few slides that will give an overview where we are and what is needed to scale up solar. That is the target of the discussion today. I'd like simply to give an overview where we are. This is the global market outlook that we run supporting Solar Power Europe. Of course, we are going to produce the results of the 2020 in 1 month or so. But you can see that our installed capacity is around 120 gigawatt was 120 gigawatt in 2019. You see the trend here where, of course, there is a big range and a lot depends on some factors that I'm going to express later on in the next slides. But you can see that in 2019 was expecting a small dip, short dip in 2020, but in reality, from the data we are collecting, solar PV has been really reliable resources even during the pandemic. And the trend is, of course, very, very good in the next 4 years. And we estimate that it can even grow 3 times in the next 4 or 5 years. You can see that from this chart from the International Energy Agency, that of course is a partner for us, as in the next 20 years, solar PV will be the new king of electricity with a production of 8,000 terawatt per hour. And this is mainly due to the low cost, of course, because solar PV is now already the cheapest source of energy in most countries, and of course because of the low cost of financing. But these will be possible, of course, if there will be also investments in the grid. The grid, the smart grid, is really essential to allow really this scale up of solar, of all the renewables in general. You see also from this chart of the International Energy Agency, which is one also of our key partners, that if you want to really keep the temperature of 1.5% in the scenario of 1.5 degree, and in a net zero emission situation, you can see how much solar PV capacity need to grow. So we need to jump from the 700 gigawatt of today to, as you can see here, to much more. And we have, as Global Solar Council, for the second time, we did a survey last year, and we are repeating this year with a different, of course, purpose, because we are talking about green recoveries, but we'd like to understand through this survey, which is still ongoing, and deadline will be the 31st of May. We want to listen the voice of the industry and understanding how well is the industry in this situation, but also we want to understand what are the barriers, what are the opportunities that really are represent important point if we really want to scale up with solar. And we like, I just extrapolated a few intermediate findings on how, for instance, what is the sentiment about the national government's official targets with renewables, especially with solar PV, and 40% of the answers has said that in reality the ambition needs to be raised significantly. We have a lot of course, Green Deal in around the world. Europe, US really are pushing a lot, but there are countries, and unfortunately I need to say some countries like Mexico, for instance, that are in reality adopting measures which are not really in favor of the solar growth, like for instance, taking out the priority of dispatch from renewables. This is very important. I would say that solar PV, the renewables, and the carbon pricing, as Global Solar Council is leading the worldwide carbon price initiative in order to harmonize and trying to apply carbon prices policies around the world to play renewables with traditional sources in a levelized field. These mechanisms are even more important for emerging markets, and carbon price can even finance a green recovery of emerging markets. And the last chart I'd like to highlight from giving the voice to the from the intermediate findings to the solar industry, which are really the measures, the key points that need to be faced in order really to go smoothly towards really a big change, and the solar PV to lead, let me say, this energy transformation. First, of course, simplification of the authorization procedures, improve and grid access rules, and better financing condition and mechanism like green bonds, green loans, etc., and tax reductions, incentives for PV investment, and self-consumption, which is very important. We are, as we'll have for the second time, our Global Solar Council Forum on the 8th and 9th of July 2021, where we will really give an overview where we are for small-scale project, large-scale project, and we'll have really a focus on Africa, and this event will be with the support of Get Invest and the great cooperation of Solar Power Europe. I'm ready for questions maybe later on in the debate and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Gianni. That was very helpful. And next, I would like to introduce to you an industry expert who can talk about the opportunity for rapidly expanding the hydrogen economy. His name is Daryl Wilson, and is Executive Director of the Hydrogen Council, which is a global CEO coalition working to accelerate global clean energy transition with hydrogen. Mr. Wilson joins the council with an impressive track record in building successful organizations and operating at the intersection of environmental and sustainability issues across sectors. But most recently, the global CEO of Hydrogenetics, a fuel cell electrolysis technology provider with manufacturing sites in Germany, Belgium, and Canada, and service centers in Asia, Europe, and North America. Here is Daryl.
Thank you, Paul, and good day to everyone. It's my pleasure to speak a little bit, building on the previous presentation, about how hydrogen is a very critical complement to the ongoing development of renewable energy around the world. Hydrogen is, in fact, a very substantive solution to the current concerns around our climate situation. Paul, is that screen clear now?
I can see it now. It looks good to me.
Good. So the Hydrogen Council was formed 5 years ago, and you can see it covers a very wide cross-section of industry. Many different sectors have met each other here and discussed their vision and commitment to realize hydrogen as a critical energy vector going forward. The IEA has reported that they anticipate hydrogen will be close to 20% of final energy use by 2050. And so there's a lot of room for growth and scale up here because hydrogen is capable enough and big enough to do the job that's needed. And based on that conviction, a number of countries around the world have made substantive progress even in the last 18 months. The leaders today are France, Germany, the European Union, China, Japan, and Korea. It's there we find substantial and clear nationally held strategies with targets, a legislative plan, and substantial funding, which I'll address in just a moment. This is perhaps different than you expected from hydrogen. Many of you will know that hydrogen's been a long time coming, and some often joke if it ever will come. But actually, if you look closely at today's situation, you're going to find something very different than your previous understanding about hydrogen. There is now widespread recognition that hydrogen can bring about substantial decarbonization across a wide variety of sectors. When I spoke about substantial funding, here's a summary. You see from France, Spain, Germany, around 10 billion US dollars committed to hydrogen-related strategies. So this is very substantial funding, and it's clear from this action that there is a conviction that hydrogen is a critical part of the decarbonization process around the world. Other countries are following rapidly. Where the US previously had a lot of focus in California only, we're now seeing substantial national strategies in the US as well. Part of the work of the Hydrogen Council is to update on the status and progress around these project initiatives. In February, we made a public report showing there are 228 large-scale hydrogen projects, most of them concentrated in Europe and Asia, and the total value of these projects is 345 billion US dollars. Yes, I said 345 billion US dollars. Out of that, about 80 billion we would call to be mature in the investment phase, meaning they're post-investment decision or into detailed project planning. So this is perhaps a lot larger scale of activation in the hydrogen community than you might have expected. And the reason for this is multiple. First of all, there's now a broad spectrum of recognition that the cost of hydrogen technology will follow a similar trajectory of the wind and solar industry, where the costs can come down much faster and to a much greater extent than ever previously imagined. That same story is playing out in the hydrogen sector today. As well, the input cost of renewable energy, as we've just heard in the last presentation, is driving the cost of the energy input, which is 80% of the cost of making green hydrogen. That cost has also fallen precipitously. The other interesting and attractive thing about hydrogen is its versatility. There's a hydrogen story across the whole energy spectrum. And in our work with McKinsey, we use this chart to show the development of hydrogen applications across a wide spectrum, looking at those that are most competitive against other low carbon solutions, and then most competitive against conventional alternatives. And here, if we populate the chart, you'll see on the top right-hand side, the sweet spot. hydrogen is a very substantial contributor to decarbonizing the hard to decarbonize sectors like refining and steelmaking and ammonia fertilizer production, and then a wide variety of heavy transit applications shown in the gray boxes on the top right side of the chart. And then looking to the left, a whole array of energy applications. So one of the compellingly attractive things about hydrogen is its versatility to replace the molecular energy sources that we use today. We talk a lot about electrification today, and so we should, and it's a very critical part of the future. However, it's important to realize that 85% of our energy today comes in molecular form, and that's where hydrogen plays a very critical role. In a report released in January of this year, the Hydrogen Council showed the extent of decarbonization available across these spectrum of decarbonization pathways within various industries. And you can see the extent of decarbonization using hydrogen is very, very significant in the 90% range. So this is why there's compelling interest in hydrogen. We also there showed a scenario about the scaling up of the industry. So we see more than a 10-fold scale up in the industry today. Hydrogen is more than 200 billion in industrial activity around the world, used for things that we typically don't see in the consumer society, for making steel, for making ammonia fertilizer, for refining gasoline and diesel fuel. So there's a lot of industrial hydrogen use today, but we see that scaling up by 10-fold to address many of these energy applications that I've just touched upon. The cumulative impact of that substantial scaling up will be a dramatic reduction in CO2 emissions, and will require a substantial capex of investment, we estimate in the range of $2 trillion US. The cost of hydrogen will come down into the $2 per kilogram range, and this is where hydrogen is competitive with existing fossil fuel energy applications. Here we show the trajectory for that cost reduction. You can see that gray, green, and blue hydrogen will be competitive with each other within 10 years. And in certain locales, it will be very compellingly attractive. And so you see on the right-hand side, places like Chile and Australia will be able to produce low-cost renewable hydrogen at below that target price of $2 US per kilogram very shortly. So summing up and leaving some time for my other friends in this panel, very briefly, your firm or country actually does have a hydrogen story. Maybe you just haven't found it yet, and maybe you're not aware of just how fast hydrogen is moving these days. It's bigger and closer than you think, and many new possibilities are open up to localize power and energy within your local jurisdiction, especially with the complement of renewable energy. Thanks very much.
A very exciting presentation there, Daryl. So thank you. Next, I want to introduce you to someone who can talk about a nature-based solution that I understand can have a very significant impact if implemented on a global scale. He co-wrote a report about it, which is called Regenerative Agriculture and Soil Carbon Solution. His name is Dr. Andrew Smith, Chief Operating Officer and Chief Scientist at the Rodale Institute. He's responsible for administering, facilitating, implementing research activities, as well as leading and expanding research teams' impact on a global stage. Dr. Smith has earned a Bachelor in Science in Agronomy at Cornell University, a Master in Science in Epidemiology at University of Maryland. He's also earned a PhD in Environmental Science at Drexel University in Philadelphia. Here is Andrew.
Great, thank you, Paul. And it's really a pleasure to be here today to talk about one of my favorite subjects, and that's regenerative agriculture and the soil carbon solution. Normally, when we talk about agriculture and climate change, we talk about it as a problem because food production accounts for about 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and the food system as a whole accounts for 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions. But we know that there's a way that we can farm that can actually take carbon dioxide and take greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere and put it back into the soil where it belongs. And we call that soil carbon sequestration. The soil is a tremendous repository of terrestrial carbon. It holds more carbon than the total global vegetational as well as atmospheric carbon combined. But through our industrial farming practices, mostly in the last 70 to 100 years, 30 to 70% of carbon in the soil has been lost to the atmosphere. And that has a tremendous result on crop production. We lose fertility and the ability to produce crops, and we therefore need to rely on inputs, which actually further exacerbates the climate or release of carbon into the atmosphere. So our research has been looking at solutions to this through regenerative and largely organic agriculture. And why we think this is so important right now is that these practices that farmers have used for 100, in some cases, thousands of years are ready to go right now. We don't need new technology to put them into practice. We don't have to wait for people's patterns and habits to change. We can put them into practice today. It is a short-term solution because at some point carbon can only hold on to or soil can only hold on to so much carbon. But we think it's a critical solution for right now for the next 5 or 10 years while we're waiting for new technologies to catch up. So let me explain a little bit about some of these practices and principles that we're talking about. The first one is keep the soil covered. Grow living plants that have living roots down into the soil, and preferably grow perennial crops so that we can have crops that can use vertical space to capture more photons from the air and therefore put more carbon into the soil through the process of photosynthesis. Increase biodiversity, both in fields, but also largely through increased crop rotations, or the number of crops that farms grow. Today, especially in the United States, the majority of farms are large-scale monocultures producing mostly corn. Grow your own fertility. So the use of cover crops and green manures is a practice that farmers had used previously and organic farmers have used extensively because they need these plants as a source of fertility because they can't just buy fertilizer and use it from a bag. But using plants as a source of fertility takes carbon and it takes nitrogen out of the atmosphere and puts it into the soil where it can be used as a source of fertility for crops. Reduce tillage. Our research has actually shown that just simply reducing tillage and using herbicides as a mechanism to simply reduce tillage does not actually sequester carbon in the soil. We need to add other practices like cover crops and green manures. And here in this picture, we show a cover crop-based organic no-till system. And this is at our research site. We're actually comparing tilled systems, conventional no-till systems, and organic cover crop-based no-till systems. The use of natural fertilizers like manure and compost. Not only do these sources of fertility put carbon back onto the soil, but they're actually a tremendous source of food for microbes. And we're starting to understand that microbes play a critical role in sequestering carbon and keeping it stored for longer periods in the soil. It's something we call the microbial carbon pump. And lastly, but not the only principle and practice that we would suggest, is integrate livestock. Normally, when we talk about climate change and livestock and animal production is demonized as a major culprit of greenhouse gas emissions. But most of those reports largely omit the soil. And the last 5 years, there's been some really good studies that have shown that using holistic adaptive management can result in tremendous amounts of carbon stored in the soil. So it's not livestock necessarily, it's how we manage the livestock. The majority of this research has been done in temperate regions in the Northern Hemisphere. The handful of studies that have looked at tropical, semi-tropical, and arid regions have shown it shows that there's tremendous potential for these diverse multi-strata systems to be a sink, a carbon sink, as opposed to a carbon source or an emitter of greenhouse gases. If we look at longer term trials like our farming systems trial at Rodale Institute, now in its 41st year, we can see the importance of stacking these practices. So in many cases, just one practice alone does not result in soil carbon sequestration, but multiple practices together ultimately get us to where we have soil carbon sequestration or farming practices that are a carbon sink. So this is just one measurement of carbon from our farming systems trial, microbial biomass carbon, but a lot of our other carbon measurements reflect the same pattern, that our more diversified organic system that has compost, cover crops, mixed species perennials, and a longer crop rotation not only have higher levels of carbon in the soil, but that has higher levels of carbon deeper in the soil. But today, in the United States, at least, all organic practices only comprise about 1% of all of the total land base in the country, where 70% of the country is practicing a grain-based conventional system that at best is not emitting greenhouse gas emissions, but not sequestering carbon at all. So we see there, especially in the United States, and really this is similar globally, organic and regenerative organic still comprises a very small percentage of the total land base. So we think there's tremendous potential there to switch the way we practice our agriculture to sequester carbon. And this has a lot of benefits beyond just soil carbon sequestration. We see that farming systems are more resilient and able to withstand periods of drought. And that's going to be important as the climate changes. Organic farmers are more profitable. Organic farming systems use less energy, and important to this conversation is they release fewer carbon emissions. So there's a lot of benefits beyond just soil carbon sequestration that we see to a global switch to regenerative organic agriculture. And I could probably go on a lot longer, but we went into a lot more depth on this topic in our white paper we put out last year titled Regenerative Agriculture and the Soil Carbon Solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. That was very informative, and with my agricultural background, I really think there's a big potential there. Okay, now I would like to introduce you to someone who can talk about a technology that's creating an opportunity for extremely large-scale reforestation. If we combine their technology with green bonds that are paid back through carbon credits earned by growing trees, I think there's a potential for unprecedented levels of reforestation. Their company is called Flash Forest, and their technology is essentially planting trees via drones. To talk to you more about this technology and its potential, Angelique Ahlstrom, who's co-founder and head of Flash Forest, is here. She has a background in robotics and energy data analytics, and was CEO at a tech ed firm, and is also a graduate of the International Space University at NASA. Here is Angelique. You might be muted, Angelique. I don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And thank you for everyone with the nature and technological based solutions for climate change. I'm here to talk about another solution, which is drone reforestation. Every year, we lose about 15 billion trees. That doesn't include what's being lost through forest fires. 1 in 10 people now live in an area that's declared a climate emergency. The IPCC recommends an additional 1 billion trees to be planted by 2050 to limit global warming from hitting 1.5 degrees Celsius. As you can see, there is an enormous market for for reforestation. The only issue is that there is a huge shortage of supply as tree planting is an arduous activity, which has resulted in quite significant plummets in employment. And so our solution is to use drones to accelerate the rate of reforestation. Now, we do this by merging UAV tech, AI, GIS mapping with a unique expertise in plant science to scale this. Our technology can be broken down into 3 key components. We have our multispectral mapping drones, which go visit the sites to detect the ideal areas for planting and conduct post-monitoring evaluation for our sites. And then we have our swarm drone technology, which we've developed to be able to plant 10 times as fast as humans. We mount our drones with the multiple deployment systems to give us customizable and rapid access to difficult terrains that only drones can access. And these deliver our seed pods autonomously with high accuracy through algorithms such as microsite detection, which will allow us to target the areas to enhance our chances of survival. For example, if there's a route or a road or a stump or a road, we'll want to target these areas such as stumps that can provide moisture for the seed vessels, shelter from the sun, and nutrients from the soil in those early fighting weeks of germination. Finally, we have our proprietary seed vessel technology, which we've developed in-house, and that includes a healthy microbiome, inclusive of a carbon-rich medium that promotes germination and seedling growth. We source our seeds locally from each site. We take into account features like assisted migration with temperature rises and how that will affect trees in the coming 3 to 5 years. And our solution offers multiple different advantages. As I mentioned, drone reforestation has enormous scaling potential at the current 10 times rate of humans. Safety is a huge concern in some areas, such as post-wildfire. The brush is too dangerous that humans aren't legally allowed to enter. And so having drones come in to fly over the high canopy and drop these vessels is one of our mechanisms, is a huge advantage, especially as post-wildfire reclamation becomes increasingly in demand. And then in general, we're able to just bypass the safety concerns of tree planting. Next is biodiversity. We always target an average of 4 to 8 different species per site as our top priority. Biodiversity is integral to the long-term survival of forest ecosystems that provide resiliency from pathogens, prevent soil erosion, and help regulate the hydrological cycles. Next, we have accessibility. As I mentioned, we're able to access difficult and unsafe terrain through different mechanisms such as embedding or dropping over the canopy. Next, we have data. Our multispectral mapping drone integrates with our ML systems, and we're able to select pre-ideal planting sites and collect follow-up data on project success, collecting long-term data such as the health vegetation index, the soil conditions, and then mapping out soil changes over time and plotting out the next ideal areas to plant in comparison. Our drones can plant in all temperatures. They can currently do a range of temperatures between -20 degrees Celsius and up to 50, allowing us to effectively double our planting times to include fall and winter conditions. This has opened up a huge time window for us, so we can plant around the clock in all biomes of the year. And finally, cost. The use of this technology really allows us to scale down the costs compared to conventional resources, because we bypass the nursery growth. And another advantage to that is that 20% to up to 50% of the carbon sink potential of trees is actually lost in those first 2 years due to nursery operations being incredibly energy intensive. And so our goal is to make reforestation not only a viable alternative, but the quickest, fastest, and cost-effective way of reforesting the planet. these are some of the minds behind Flush that require a lot of space, robotics expertise, incredible business development expertise from people who've worked with the Nature Conservancy, Deloitte. We have a Nobel Prize winner for climate change on our advisory board, and our co-founders who are currently in the field. We just finished planting across 13 different sites with some of Canada's largest reforestation, largest forestry companies, and we're currently in partnerships with governments, environmental agencies, forestry companies with, or mining companies with offset and reclamation obligations, companies looking to fulfill pledge commitments, and environmental agencies looking to really scale up reforestation. And so right now we're opening talks with about our next scaling plans. And so if you are interested in backing major reforestation efforts that are going to be required for the next decade, then please get in touch. To maximize our impact, we're going to be planting in the biomes that can sequester the most carbon around the planet. So a lot of these hotspots are going to be in tropical areas that are home to over 80% of the world's species, and also hold the most carbon, the highest carbon requirements to trap the most CO2. So that's a little bit about us, and thank you for having us today.
Thank you, Angelique. That was very impressive. So yeah, I mean, the potential is very large with what you have in mind. Next, I would like to talk about next, I would like to talk to you about some of these technologies that can re-employ oil and gas workers for a low carbon economy. Her name is Danielle Smith, and she is president of the Alberta Enterprise Group, which is an organization founded by a group of leading business leaders in Alberta. Their members employ over 100,000 Albertans and generate billions of dollars of economic activity every year. Several leaders in this group are now investing in technologies to facilitate to a low transition, low carbon economy, including generating blue hydrogen. Danielle is going to talk about some of these opportunities and how this can be implemented in many oil and gas producing areas of the world.
Thanks so much, Paul. I'm just delighted to be part of this panel discussion, and I'm so pleased at how you've really broadened out the discussion. Part of the reason I'm glad to be included is I do feel in some ways like we're developing a bit of a hierarchy in the hydrogen world by labeling it different names, whether it's gray, blue, or green. And I think that there's maybe another way that we need to be looking at the hydrogen economy, especially if we're going to have the large players who are already in this field able to participate and apply innovative solutions to get to zero. One of the things that I have been doing over the last month is just talking to a variety of individuals from different industries, so our members. And I think Daryl described it well, is that we've got big problems in decarbonizing some of the huge areas that we all rely on, whether it's the steel industry, whether it's cement. Cement is responsible for 10% of emissions. Whether it's you get an electric car, you still need roads to drive on, so asphalt and concrete there as well. So how are we going to do that? And one of the things I'd put into context in Alberta is that we have reserves that are the third largest in the world. We're the fourth largest natural gas producer in the world. And so when we develop solutions in Alberta, they will already be at a scale that can be adopted elsewhere. A couple of the big companies like Suncor and ATCO, just to Daryl's point again about finding the hydrogen story in your backyard, they announced a partnership on developing hydrogen in conjunction with each other, blue hydrogen, where they will be able to produce 300,000 tons of hydrogen at a cost of $2 per kilogram, and then capture the carbon and store it is the plan right now. But there are other things that can be done. And so their time frame for that is 2028. So when you think about the timescale that we're looking at and the concern that Paul has of can we solve this problem fast enough, I would say that that is an indication that yes, we can. So let me tell you a few of the stories that I'm hearing. One of the things I would say is even with our renewable technologies, for instance, like wind will not be truly zero emissions until all of the components that go into a wind turbine are zero emissions. Wind require plastic, it requires cement, it requires steel, it requires transportation. One of our members got into the wind farm business because when he was establishing one of the farms, it was 1,500 truckloads to get the wind turbines to the place it needed to go. Solar is the same problem as well, silica, plastic, and aluminum. Until those are zero emissions, solar is not going to be zero emissions either. So one of the things that I think the conversation is turning to in Alberta is because we've been such an historic large emitter, I think there's been a perception that there's been a reluctance to really tackle this problem. And I would say there's been a sea change in attitude. And maybe it's because a carbon price of $170 per ton has been set by our federal government. And so you've got a number of businesses who are all talking about how do we reduce emissions? How do we get to net zero? And it may well be that using technologies like was just described on regenerative agriculture as well as forestry play a role. But I think probably a more important role is going to be in looking at some of the technologies that can develop the resource using the expertise that we have and either leaving the carbon dioxide in the ground or finding a way to capture it, return it, or capture it and recycle it into interesting and useful products. So one of the areas that is getting, or one of the companies that's getting quite a bit of attention and excitement is Proton Technologies. And they've developed a process where they will inject oxygen into the ground so that it creates a chemical process so that the carbon dioxide stays underground and it's just the hydrogen that comes up. One of the advantages of this is they're able to use existing infrastructure in order to get it to a collection point. And then from there, it's easier to distribute. There's another company, Icona, and they use, again, their own technology as well to also produce a sort of a green hydrogen, but the carbon associated with it is then in a solid form. And they're looking for partners in how they would be able to market that carbon stream so that they can turn it into an additional source of revenue. I was speaking this morning with a bitumen company that has a process where they are able to develop the bitumen without as well producing greenhouse gas emissions. And then they use the bitumen transported in solid form so that it can be transformed into carbon fibers. And carbon fibers are incredibly valuable. If you can create carbon fibers out of a barrel of bitumen, it's actually worth 5 times the amount that we're able to sell bitumen on for its historic uses. So, and I was also talking this morning with a natural gas company that has found a way to make natural gas zero emissions as well by using hydroelectric power as the base source. So the way the conversation is turning in Alberta around these companies is once we have captured the carbon dioxide, what do we do with it? And there's a number of companies that have been seed funded with through a group called COSIA, and they are developing grand scale types of carbon uses for the carbon dioxide pure stream. So I'll give you just a couple of examples. I see I only have a minute left, but Carbon Built is one company that is looking at concrete as their solution. So they take carbon dioxide and turn it into concrete, so it captures the concrete permanently. CERT is also a company that captures carbon dioxide, turns it into chemical feedstocks. There's another company called Airco, and they have captured carbon dioxide, turned it into ethylene, which they then turn into hand sanitizer, and interestingly, vodka. So they actually have a vodka that has won taste competitions that comes from carbon dioxide. And then, of course, I think we've all heard of carbon upcycling, which is also a patented technology. It's Bill Gates's company where they capture the carbon dioxide from the air, run it through an electrolysis process, and turn it into biofuels. So I think that this creates a larger conversation around the issue of blue hydrogen, because I think it really comes down to zero emissions hydrogen. If you can find a use for the carbon dioxide to capture it permanently or to store it underground, I think it puts it on the same level of environmental value as green hydrogen. And I think that Alberta is going to probably lead the forefront on developing some of these technologies that will be able to be produced at mass scale.
Well, Danielle, that's very helpful. And the one thing that I really like about it is that that you're outlining a way where we can end up creating broad-based support. You have all these oil and gas workers, all these voters, and you're showing them that there is another way to have a zero economy and still have a very prosperous economy, like selling bitumen at 5 times the price is a good way to go, and make carbon fiber tanks. So that's store hydrogen. So so big things need to happen, and it has to happen fast, right? As you can see from where things are at, and especially when you look at the impacts of climate change on human security. So thank you very much, Danielle. And now the next person I'd like to talk is from these speakers, you've heard about selected technologies and nature-based solutions that can be implemented on a global scale. Now I'd like to introduce you to somebody who can give you an overview of the wide range of solutions that are available, and there is a wide range. His name is Bjørnar Egede-Nissen, and he's co-chair of Drawdown Toronto. He is in the process of completing his PhD in international politics of climate change. And Drawdown is partnered with Project Drawdown, which is the world's leading resource for climate solutions. Project Drawdown has done an enormous amount of work to map, model, and measure the top global solutions to reduce concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Bjørnar is going to give us an overview of their research and what they see as realistically possible for the world to transition to a low carbon economy. So Bjørnar, you're on.
Thank you, Paul. We've heard about some solutions to climate change and global warming. So I'd like to take a step back and look at the big picture, the whole picture of climate solutions that we need in order to avoid disastrous climate change this century. And I'd also like to make the connection back to the topic of this conference, human security, because climate solutions are the only thing that stand between us and disastrous consequences for human security and great tragedy, and not in the not too far future. Climate solutions also have enormous implications for national and even global security. As I said, I want to talk about climate solutions, and it's thanks to Project Drawdown, a large international research project, that we know that we have the means and the technologies to fix this problem, and that we can enable a different future than the one we're headed for, a future with a better and healthier and more prosperous better, healthier, and more prosperous future for all people on this planet. As I said, it's a research project that has mapped, modeled, and measured a lot of climate solutions that are in use in the world today. And this work started in 2014 because up until then, nobody had actually done this work yet. And Project Drawdown has now become the world's leading resource for climate solutions. So I'm going to start my slideshow at this point. So what is a climate solution? Well, it's one of three things. It's something that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by reducing demand, something that can replace high carbon sources, or something that removes carbon from the atmosphere, as we've heard by some of the speakers.
Are you sharing? Because I don't see a share. Are you sharing?
My bad. I thought I did. Technology. Try again.
I see it now.
Yes. Always something. Thank you. Okay. So the result of what Project Drawdown did was a comprehensive catalog of existing proven solutions that can be used to eliminate atmospheric carbon emissions. And it resulted in a list of about 80 solutions, depending on how they're defined. And the solutions are based on an extensive review of peer-reviewed academic literature. There are a lot of examples, as you see. Here are some of the solutions summarized in economic sectors. And some solutions are well known and others are less so, like well-known solutions include wind turbines and electric vehicles and solar panels, and others that are less known are microgrids or conservation agriculture or sustainable rice production. And we know that if we implement all of the solutions that the Project Drawdown has found, we can achieve drawdown, which is the point in time when we start to reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. And that's desirable because we are headed for a world of several degrees of warming. And thanks to Project Drawdown, we also know that we have powerful reasons to want to do this beyond just the fact that it can prevent climate change. One reason is that climate solutions on the whole bring vast financial savings compared to business as usual. So by mid-century, they estimate that the cumulative financial return on investment could be more than 500% compared to continuing with business as usual and existing practices and technologies. And so that's on the order of $100 trillion saved compared to just doing what we're doing now. So it's clear that climate solutions cost substantially less over the lifetime of their use than what we're doing, and that there's a massive gain, net gain. At the same time as we can enormously reduce the amount of carbon that we release into the atmosphere, and even start to draw carbon down, remove it from the atmosphere. And this analysis does not even consider the enormous destruction that climate change could cause later this century, or the co-benefits that we could realize by implementing many of the solutions. So, oops. Oh, where were we? Okay. So as I said, co-benefits are things that we can that we can use to realize other sorry, I lost my my thread here. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to wrap it up, I think. So the case for climate action, I'm going to get back on track. Safeguarding human security means that we need to prevent the conditions that will predictably lead to disaster. So every ounce, every gram of greenhouse gas emissions that we can prevent from reaching the atmosphere today will make a difference. It will reduce the future global temperature. It will thus reduce and ameliorate the response by the climate system, thus leading to less hardship for many people in the future. So it's never too late, and it's not too late to start doing something. The second point is investing in climate solutions in the location where people live in insecurity today will help reduce that insecurity, and which will then have implications for national and even global security in the future by helping people where they live, by taking care of their food insecurity, by conditions that lead to mass migration or even to violence. I don't know why it's doing that. It's also worth pointing out that we need to invest everywhere in the world, not just in the rich countries, even though that helps too. That helps preventing climate disaster and human insecurity. Because the Project Drawdown has not created a shopping list, we need all of the solutions that are listed there. And finally, the last point is that climate solutions are not impractical, and they're not expensive. And in fact, we can save a lot of money over the next 30 years if we start implementing these solutions on the massive scale. Okay, thank you very much.
So thank you, Bjørnar. That was very helpful. Great overview. And so now we're running. So we're at 3:09, and I think we have what, 6 minutes yet. Okay, so much appreciated. And we've got many questions that we can talk about. The one big one that I'm interested in is what can be done and how big of scale up can be done in 10 years. So if we start with just solar thinking in triple in 5 years, does that mean, Gianni, would you think that in 10 years you could get you could go to 10 times what we have? Just how fast, if you could do 3 times in 5 years, and then the next 5 you do 3 times again. Okay, does that mean that we're at 9 times in 10 years if you really had the money and got it on the go?
Yes. We are talking about a big jump, exponential jump.
Yeah.
And this will depend how we will manage this coming 3-4 years. And when I highlight before the some key aspects that the industry feel are really the bottleneck. Authorization procedure is one, of course. As I was saying, is really the cost of development anyway. Authorization is too much, and really simplification is the first one, of course.
Okay, and that sounds really good, because we've only got now 4 minutes. So I'm wondering from Daryl. Daryl, is that if the hydrogen where you're at, there's certainly production. If we would then go and really ramp up, like either green and blue hydrogen, right, and stuff, what kind of multiplier could you get in 10 years if you really had it on the go and everybody on board worldwide? Could you have 10 times the amount? Where are you thinking?
So given that there's a huge amount of hydrogen already in production on the industrial side, if I tell you that we can double that in the next 10 years, that's a huge growth in the industry and in the contribution of hydrogen. But what's even more striking is out of that currently $200 billion business, probably less than $500 million is related to hydrogen energy applications today. So that means $500 million is going to 100 billion. So you can see there's a huge scale up going on in this hydrogen application. And then the carbon that's mitigated as a result is very substantial. So it depends on the basis you're using. It's not quite the same as saying how much will you further build out wind or solar, because those are existing incumbent renewable applications and you're building up. With hydrogen, we're starting from very small scale when it comes to hydrogen energy. And therefore we have a massive scale up even in the next 10 years.
Yeah. Now, the one company that I got to know through the Hydrogen Council, they have got a technology to sequester the carbon that is currently made from natural gas. So right now, the petrochemical foundries create a lot of hydrogen from natural gas, and the CO2 is just released in the atmosphere, and that's massive. That's like almost like the amount of carbon emissions of Indonesia is what I remember once. So that stuff should be fixed, and that carbon should be sequestered or stored and turned into other products or something.
That's correct.
Like
that. So over the next 10, 20 years, we anticipate a phase out of gray hydrogen in exchange for blue hydrogen. And in fact, the blue hydrogen applications coming from fossil fuels, and Danielle touched on this point, have the ability to bring a huge amount of decarbonization at relatively low green premiums, and to do it quickly. And so that's why it's very important that we don't villainize the oil and gas industry in the midst of this journey. We need to understand that they have a big contribution to make as they go through the transition with us.
Yeah, that sounds good. Now, the last one I'm thinking, I got 1 minute left, and now Andrew, so you've been working on this for your whole life, it seems. So what kind of restorative agriculture could be implemented if the word got out and about how this could be done, just how much could you do compared to where you are today?
Yeah, it concerns me because, we're at 1% of organic agriculture in the United States after 70 years of working on it. So it needs to accelerate quickly. Europe's closer to 9%. I think, Bjørnar put that chart up of a lot of nature-based solutions, and a lot of them touch on agriculture. Food waste, reducing food waste and then recycling that into the environment. So I think that it's not just soil carbon sequestration, but I think agriculture in general, there's a lot of areas, while I focused on livestock, certainly reducing our diets is another solution is what we're eating. So I think it needs to scale up quickly, and probably especially needs to scale up in developing countries like Africa and Southeast Asia, partly as a food security issue.
Yeah, that sounds good. Now, Angelique, one last one there. So there's a huge potential there to get this going. And you were talking about 7 billion trees going down each year is being consumed. And so that's a lot of trees. So just to break even, we need to plant 7 billion. Okay. And so what can be done in the next 10 years if you take all the people with your technology and implement? How fast could you replant, and how many billion trees can you get done in 10 years?
Yeah, great question. So right now the number is more like quantifiably 15, and that doesn't include the most recent wildfires, and about 5 billion of that is naturally regenerated and planted by human means. Our goal right now is to plant 1 billion trees by 2028, but scaling at the yearly rate that we will till then and thereafter, we can hit about 10 billion by 2030, which amounts to about 2.5% of global carbon emissions, and that's more than double Canada's current emissions. And so huge potential to scale up to that, and we can even hit 1 trillion ambitiously if we get all the funding and the government, institutional, corporate backing required to get to those figures. The 1 trillion tree challenge is trying to hit 1 trillion right now. We're speaking with them to kind of help them reach that mission, but drone reforestation is going to be the solution to that, sort of revolutionizing the reforestation industry.
Well, that's really good. Now, I hope the Drawdown people are looking at all these new things and updating their estimates. So is that right? So listen, thank you guys very much for attending.